Hello, this is Allie with the Perception Trainers, author of the Perception Diet, and today we have part 3 of our Emotional Mastery series. So in this video, I'm essentially going to kind of sum up what was talked about in part 1 and 2. So if you were feeling kind of like confused and overwhelmed by all of the information in part 1 and 2, that's totally fine. I was essentially laying the groundwork for this video so that you would have all of the background information so that everything I'm about to say here would make sense. Second thing that I want to say before you watch this video is a lot of what I'm going to say here is going to come from the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton. So if you want to learn more about kind of what he's saying and where what I'm saying is coming from, please look him up. I put a link down below to his Biology of Belief talk. Also, I get a lot of this stuff from Martha Beck. Okay, so you can read her books, Finding Your Own North Star, Finding Your Way in a Wild New World, Diana herself. She's got some really great books on psychology, and so a lot of this stuff also comes from there. So I'm kind of taking all of these concepts and I'm squashing them together, and then I would even say like a lot of this stuff is just like coming from traditional spiritual modalities, and a lot of this information has just been passed down. Okay, so all that being said, just remembering that none of this is my information. I am not laying claim to any of this. This is not my discovery. This has been discovered many, many times by many, many people. I'm just saying it in this way, in this format, in this video because, right, this message needs to be spread. So this is not me being awesome. This is just stuff. Okay, so in part 1, you learned that from the age of 0 to 7, you're essentially being programmed, right? You're being socially conditioned not to be your authentic self, right? But to live within the confines of what is socially acceptable in your kind of culture, your family, your society structure, okay? Which led into part 2, right? Where we talked about how all wounds, all triggers, okay, are coming from an abandonment wound. That when you were young, right, you felt your parents pull away from you or shame you for something that you did or did not do, right, that was not socially acceptable, right, and this caused you to go into an existential state of fear, all right? So basically when you were shamed, the way that you were shamed, and literally everybody has been through this. If you have any sense that you can't trust nature, that you cannot trust reality, or that you cannot trust yourself, that there's something wrong with you, this happened to you, all right? So I've never met anybody that does not have this going on in their life. So if you are fully in the present moment all the time, completely trusting, and you fully and completely trust yourself, then never mind, you don't need these videos. So that abandonment wound, right, taught you that there was something wrong with you, and therefore you needed to moderate your behavior. And it broke you out of the trance that you were in, that you could fully and completely trust your reality to meet your needs. All right, so this is a very important thing to understand, that when that abandonment wound happened, prior to that, and that could have been for like 10 seconds, well, like you were a baby, this abandonment wound could have happened to you literally like while you were being born. You may never have not had this, or it could have come much later in life. But essentially, we all come in born as children fully and completely trusting reality. And this is the thing, right? Babies aren't planning, they're not worrying about getting their needs met or whatever. They fully and completely trust that their needs are going to be met. And when that abandonment wound happens, this snaps us out of that feeling, that state of being, that presence, right? And we start to need to remember the past to try to predict the future, right? So we start to pattern recognize, right? So literally during that abandonment wound, what happens is we switch from our higher consciousness into our reptilian brainstem, okay? And this is a huge key to understand, that when that existential fear is ignited in us, right? I did something wrong and bad, I don't know what it is, love went away, and therefore survival is threatened, and I cannot trust reality to meet my needs. and I'm not at a cognitive level where I can actually understand why this happened or what this was about, there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with reality, right? This is what all spiritual contexts are talking about when they talk about the fall, okay? This is the knowledge of good and evil. This is you become naked and you become ashamed, okay? These stories are allegories for what has happened to human consciousness. Right? So, and the snake represents the reptilian brain. You see, this allegory starts to make a lot more sense when put in this context of each individual life, right? So, when that existential fear is ignited in you, you switch from your higher consciousness, fully accepting yourself and fully being in harmony with nature and in harmony with reality, like the Garden of Eden. They were naked, they were one with God, it was all happening, right? The snake tempted Eve, so the reptilian brain becomes ignited, and then they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. They now have to toil and work and have pain in childbirth, and they realize they're naked. So this is the fall. You see what I'm saying? This is when you started to have shame about who you were, and when you stopped trusting reality to provide for you, and that everything was happening the way that it was supposed to be happening, and that's what happened. Okay, so it kicks you into your limbic brain, your reptilian brain. And in the reptilian brain, okay, how this functions is it puts you into a state of fear. All right, so now this is where Dr. Bruce Lipton's work comes in. When a cell is in a state of love, it is capable of growth, it is capable of expansion, it is capable of reproduction, it is capable of evolution and adaptation to different environments. It is essentially creative, healing, and expansive, okay? When a cell is in a state of fear, all of that goes on lockdown, and the only thing that matters is maintenance of the status quo. All right, so now if we understand that our biology is simply a reflection of our consciousness, which is true, right? Everything is a reflection of our consciousness. That when your consciousness is in a state of fear, which it is if this abandonment wound has happened to you and you have not healed the abandonment wound, you have not integrated the abandonment wound, you are literally living from a state of fear all the time. Okay, so like when we talk about how in this world we are constantly in a state of stress, it's because we are. We are constantly in a state of fear to the point where it's just normal. People who are not in a state of fear don't really exist. Because here's what I'm going to tell you, right? When we're in a state of fear and we've ignited the limbic brain, all that matters to us is maintenance of the status quo, making sure we get our base needs met and that our environment stays predictable so that we can survive it. So this is where all that pattern recognition comes in. This is where feeling like we need to completely remember the past and analyze the past and make rules about the past in order that we can try to manipulate our future to avoid pain and seek pleasure, okay? So understanding that when we're in this state of fear, growth, evolution, and change are not actually possible, all right? So we get kicked into the state of fear. We don't even know that that's what's happened. It's happened very, very, very young in our childhood life. And then we are literally, at that point, because we're in a state of fear, just running our programming, right? So we're running our programming, we're running the socially accepted thoughts, we're running the socially accepted conditions. We are trying to acclimatize to what our environment tells us is right and wrong, right? And then what happens is you are essentially living out of alignment with your true self, because your true self is not going to fit into any socially contextual box, right? So what's going to happen is sometimes you're going to express who you really are. You're going to express your true self. You're going to experience rejection, right? Because more or less, you're probably going to experience rejection, which then deepens that abandonment wound, kicking you deeper into fear, right? Or you are going to do what you need to do to be socially acceptable, which is essentially you abandoning yourself, right? and therefore you create a deeper abandonment wound, right? So you're playing your programming, and anytime you're not playing your programming, it's going to be scary. It's going to feel hurt, and it's going to feel painful, because remembering that your brainstem is wanting you to just do what you know to do, because that's how you have survived so far. You see what I'm saying here? Staying within the social context and staying within your programming, even if it's totally painful and totally awful, you will do it, because in a state of fear, growth is not possible. Also, in this state of fear, you need to understand, you may be able to manifest different circumstances for yourself. So say you developed a really negative belief about abundance when you were a child, that abundance is not a thing, and that you're poor, and that you're not going to have your needs met. Like, this is a negative belief that we take on about reality, right? So we're not trusting reality. So then you could even get yourself to a place where you have lots of money in the bank, and you have changed your reality to the point where you are no longer poor. However, if you have not healed that abandonment wound, right, you're still in your brainstem, even though your entire reality is different, you're still going to feel poor. You're still going to feel fear that that money could go away at any point. You're still going to feel like it's never enough, it's never enough, it's never enough. You're still going to feel like you're one step away from being a bag lady or a homeless guy on the street, right? And we've talked about this, right? It's perception. It's not necessarily what's actually happening to you, right? So you may go from relationship to relationship to relationship to relationship and think every single time, this is new, this is different, this is new, this is different, it's going to be different than it was last time, and it ends up being the same abusive relationship over and over and over again. You quit your jobs, get a new job, quit your job, get a new job, quit your job, get a new job. It's the same emotional experience every single time. Okay, the reason this is happening is twofold, right? Number one, your brainstem is stopping you from making actual change. You think you're making changes, you think you're doing different stuff, you may be able to actually even shift your reality, but you have not shifted your internal state. You are still running a program. Okay, so that's the first thing to understand. If your emotional experience of life is one of stress or fear, right? If you have a similar emotional experience over and over again in your jobs and in your relationships and in your finances and you're running a program based on your brainstem. Everything that you try and do different isn't going to be different, because it can't be, right? We understand this. Second thing, when a cell is not in a state of love and therefore growth, expansion, and evolution, after it's been in a fear state, which is essentially a lockdown state for a period of time, it will activate an autophagy program, which is essentially a self-destruct program. Okay, so now if we take that and reflect that into our consciousness, if you're in a state of fear and you're running your old programs and you're thinking you're doing different things and getting the same results over and over, and you're not understanding how life works, and you're lost in thought, right? You're thinking all the time about your past to try and predict your future in order to try and get pleasure or escape pain, right? This should happen, this shouldn't happen, this is how I've decided reality should and should not be, and when that does not happen, I am hurt and disappointed and wounded. You are also going to have and develop self-destructive behaviors, okay? And so these are the behaviors of eating or drinking or even just, abusive relationships, any kind of self-destructive behavior that you feel like you don't know how to get out of. Like you're struggling, you don't get why, like you feel like you totally understand why you have this self-destructive behavior, but yet you still can't get yourself out of it. This is what's happening, okay? Because you're in a state of fear, and you've been in a state of fear for so long without even being aware of it, you now have a self-destruct program running. And we can see this in our society. It's not normal to even see someone who doesn't have at least something that they do to themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that is causing decay and causing destruction and causing chaos. Because from a state of fear, only chaos can be created, right? And like I say, if we're in a state of fear long enough, we are going to start to create chaos for ourselves via self-destructive behaviors, because that's what the cell does. That's what biology does. When you're in a state of fear for long enough, it's going to try and end itself, okay? Because the point of life is evolution, expansion, and growth. So if you're not going with that, you're going to be destroying yourself. Does this make sense? So this is how all of this ties together, right? That you're going to have adopted programming from outside of you. You're going to have these abandonment wounds, and then because all of us have been trained that our emotions are bad and scary, right? That depression and anxiety and these things are diseases that you can't do anything about, and that your negative emotions should be avoided at all costs. You are essentially creating deeper and deeper abandonment wounds inside yourself every single time you experience a negative emotion and you run from it, or you reject it, or you tell yourself you shouldn't feel it, or you deny it, or you suppress it with a self-sabotaging behavior. You are creating a deeper wound. So, like I've said in many videos, your emotions are a guidance system for you. Okay, now remembering, love and joy are states. Okay, and this is the ultimate goal of this emotional mastery, is to get yourself into a state of love and joy, inside of which you may feel sadness, you may feel fear, you may feel any of these emotions, but your experience of those emotions inside the love state are going to be totally different than your experience of those emotions inside of the fear state. When you're in the fear state, which most of us are, most of the time your negative emotions are simply triggers that are trying to trigger you to go back to the memory of when that initial trauma, that initial abandonment wound happened, so that you can bring loving presence to that moment where you fully reintegrate yourself. Okay? You come to a place where you no longer have a judgment about what happened to you, that you can be with the emotion, that you can be with the memory, that you can be with the experience, no longer label it as wrong and bad, and integrate that part of yourself. Because right now what's happened is that abandonment wound happened, and there's now a fragmented part of yourself, right? They call this this work soul retrieval a lot of the time, because it's literally like a part of your soul is stuck in that moment, right? And therefore you keep having the same emotional experience over and over and over again that's being triggered by your reality, you see? Because it's trying to call you back to that initial moment so that you can integrate that part of yourself that was left behind into your present moment, so that you become an integrated human being, which is the path to self-realization. This is a part of what enlightenment is, where you lose your judgment of reality having to be a specific way, that things went wrong and that things can go wrong, which means you start to be able to release and relax your addiction to thinking all the time. And you move into that right brain consciousness that we were talking about last video, where you are feeling. You essentially undo the fall and come back to the Garden of Eden, come back to your nakedness, come back to who you truly actually are, and you live as yourself in this world without all that traumatic fear that there's something wrong with reality and that there's something wrong with yourself. So when you come into this integrated state, you can lose your best friend and be very sad, right? And have the emotional experience of losing your friend. But it's not going to trigger an abandonment trauma in you where you need to run from that pain or self-destruct, or where you believe that your friend shouldn't have died. You see what I'm saying? You're going to be so at peace and at one with reality that your experience of reality, good or bad, right or wrong, is far less dramatic, because it's no longer good or bad, right or wrong, it just is, okay? And the second thing is that you come to a place where you start to be able to actually express who you are, right? Where you are no longer running a program and getting the same results all the time, and even if you change your entire reality, you still feel the same way. You can actually change your emotional experience of this reality to the point where you are in a completely different mental and emotional state, and you no longer need to be in thought, and therefore you can be in that right side of the brain, which we now know is so much more powerful. Okay? You can be in the present moment, which you will learn all time and all space exist simultaneously, and therefore when you're in this right brain hemisphere, when you're in this right brain dominance, you are processing 11 million bits of information at a time versus 40. Okay, so we're going to go more into this in the next video, but that wraps it all up about the programming and your emotions and why you're afraid of them. So like, subscribe, share. Don't ask questions yet, because I will probably get to them in the next video. And then I will see you in the next video. Okay? Mwah!